This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back with another Film Friday. This week, we are discussing none other than What We Do in the Shadows.
I absolutely love this movie. Like, won't even save it till the end to say that. It is one of my absolute favorite all-time movies, and definitely my favorite comedy.
All right, sure. Yeah. So it's kind of a blend this week. We've got It's a little bit of everything. So we've got horror, comedy. It is a mockumentary, so I love those formats.
Definitely.
And it was directed by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement, who also wrote the screenplay as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic comedic duo. It's very interesting. Kind of a turn away from our love of Flight of the Conchords, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
But very effective. We love this. Yeah. Anyways, let's get into it.
Yeah, for sure. And just before we do, I just want to give a shout out and a little bit of a credit to Brian Huft, a listener who we've definitely talked about this movie with in the past. And I don't recall if he mentioned it recently to do it on the show for Film Friday, but I know you love it, and everyone else probably loves it too. So here we go. Jermaine Clement, yeah, like a lot of you, like we just said, a lot of you will remember that name or recognize that name from Flight of the Conchords. I think we have a lot of the same humor interests as well as horror interests as our listeners.
For sure. And I feel like there's definitely a comedic style that is very similarly presented in both of those projects.
Definitely.
So it's very fluid transition. Mm-hmm. And yeah. Okay, so we are going to be discussing kind of a blend today. We're going to be talking about some of our favorite moments in the movie, a few of our favorite characters, and just talking about some of these more common vampire tropes that are presented in this and in a comedic fashion. And it's just it's so original.
Definitely. Because you see, like, you know, the mockumentaries aren't unique. Like, we've seen them a ton. And I'm reminded of, like, Fubar was one of the first, like, true mockumentaries I ever watched.
True.
Back in the day. But you rarely see it with... A humor and paranormal rarely blend. So this is very unique. It's a very unique film. And I feel like could only be done by a British cast or a New Zealand-based cast or Australian-based cast. Like, it just wouldn't work, like, in North America for some reason.
The humor wouldn't be as effective because it's so dry.
Right,
and
exactly.
It's very dry, and they do such a good job of making it seem like a legitimate documentary, right? Like, they've got the New Zealand Film Board at the very beginning that you see, and it's all, like, cheesy, like, 90s kind of thing going on there. Yeah. So, I totally agree with you, Andrew, there. Like, the script and the culture, it definitely is endemic to British, whatever, like the Commonwealth, not including Canada.
No, for sure. Mm-hmm. So did you want to kind of give just like a rough breakdown of the plot, so to speak?
Yeah, okay. It's fairly basic.
Yeah.
Basically, a film crew is following a troupe of vampires that are flatting together in New Zealand, and it's very... There's a lot of ups and downs and and various things that they experience or document, I guess I should say, that explore this sort of underground world, the secret society of vampires.
Right, yeah. Just outside Wellington.
Wellington, right,
in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, I mean, right off the bat, like, we're given... It's funny, right? Like, they kind of pack in a whole bunch of vampire tropes in the introduction before you actually get to the song from, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name. It's Norma something or other, and it is such a cool song.
I want to say Norma Jean. I know it's not
Norma Jean. That's another Bob's reference there, right? But literally that 5-minute bit before that intro song, there's so much stuff. Did you want to just like touch on a few of those things right now?
Let's do it.
So like I like picked up, obviously, like the introduction is the coffin in a very dark room, and it pops open, and it's just so cheesy on purpose. Viago with the arms sticking up in the air, and looks like he's just being pulled pulled by a string, but like, and then whoever's pulling it is struggling a little bit or something, right? And so levitation right off the bat, like he doesn't even want to climb out of the coffin. He's just levitating out as if to like show off to the camera crew, right?
Definitely showing off.
And then, ooh, nighttime. Like,
yeah.
it's just like,
so we get that right away. The idea that
sunlight.
Exactly, that they cannot
thereof.
live in the sun, and that comes up again a little bit further into the narrative. So we get that right off the bat, and then he goes and wakes up his flatting mates, and he's got kind of a weird assortment of them. So he goes to Deacon first, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
He goes to Deacon. Yeah. And Deacon is the ascribed bad boy of the group.
He's the youngest.
The youngest, definitely.
He's only 187 years old.
Is that the exact name?
Yes. Yeah, he's the youngest.
And so he's an interesting bird. He is my favorite more and more every time we watch this movie.
Funny.
There's so many little bits, especially the part where he's like, when you're a vampire, you become sexy.
Yeah. He's like, just looking at himself. Like, but that's an interesting thing, too. Like, we can come back to that. The idea of, like, mind control and just, like, the perception that he would be sexy when he's clearly not dressed up. Because at that point, they hadn't been given the camera to take pictures of each other's outfits or something like that.
Right,
Because
digital camera.
They couldn't see each other, so they're drawing pictures of how each other look.
So that's another one, too. Okay, so we have... It's so packed, right? That goes after the introduction, though. And so we get this hilarious comedic scene where they're all getting dressed up to go downtown. And again, they run into the problem of they can't see how they look. So they've got these hilarious drawings that look nothing like what they actually look like.
No, not even close.
And they're all just like parading around in the halls. And there's the one scene where they have the outfit with no one inside it, kind of dancing down the hall for Vladislav to see.
Yeah.
Vladislav the poker.
Right. So let's go through the characters then, actually. So we've got Viago, who we're introduced to first, and he's kind of like the guy who runs the house, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Because he's this 18th century dandy, as Deacon describes him, who's very controlling and stuff, right? And he's like, I can't remember the exact age, I didn't write it down.
Actually, I think it's Vladislav that describes him as a dandy.
Oh, is it? Okay, right. And Deacon calls him pedantic. Yeah. But he's like 300 and something, like 360 something. So he's quite a bit.
I think he's like 396 or something like that. He says it at the very end, right? When he's like, "Oh, I'm just a cradle robber," essentially, with a 96-year-old woman.
And then you've got the next oldest, which is Vladislav, which is this obvious play off of Vlad the Impaler, Vlad the Poker, which is awesome. And he's so like 900 or 800 and something, right? So he's from the classic like medieval era. And then you've got Peter, the oldest, who's downstairs in the classic like sarcophagus, like massive stone tomb. Yeah. And he is a whopping 8,000 years old.
Yes.
So that's an interesting thing I want to talk about later.
I love the way they spell his name too. Peter.
Yeah.
With a Y instead of another E.
Right.
It's so good.
Yeah.
So ancient.
Yeah, so ancient.
So that's the main crew. And then we do get introduced a little bit further. Once they go downtown, we meet Jackie, who is the familiar of Deacon.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting trope too that we explore in this film. This idea that vampires have non-vampiric familiars or almost like slaves or servants that do their bidding and are basically put to task. And I have a few little points on that we'll get into in a little second here. Okay. I did a little poking around in the world of the underground vampire online society.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so she's quite interesting. And then obviously she is the one that brings Nick into the plot as well. So Nick is her 12-year-old boyfriend, or was 12 years old at the time he was her boyfriend.
Yeah.
And she essentially is tasked with bringing victims for them to eat. So she brings this dude, Nick, and then she also brings, what was it, Sophia? It was some other chick.
Some chick she hated.
Josephine.
Right,
Josephine.
Right.
And so Josephine and Nick become the main course that night. It's not the bruschetti. They would have them believe.
That's so funny too, right? Like so Jackie brings them in and right away they're just trying to mess with them. It's like there's this element with vampires and witches and these types of paranormal entities that really want to like mess with your mind, right? But they make it so funny. So it's like, wet or cold spaghetti just because
spaghetti.
Well, I was pretty sloppy looking too. It's just like, I usually prefer it, but I like it when it's warm or whatever, right? It's just like, it already has to look like worms, but that's what they have to do to like trying to mess with people's heads.
Oh, that's hilarious. Awesome. I thought it's just such a feeble way of going about it. And they think they're so masterful. Clever. And that's their one trick that they've managed to pull together of all these years of flattening together, which we don't actually know how long that's been. I would imagine it would be a number of decades.
Oh, yeah. Well, we kind of do. Because, like, at the beginning, they go through all those, like, photographs of them through the years. And it was, like, them in the year 2000 with, like, the 2000 glasses on. And, like, in the 80s and stuff. So it's, like, it's been a long time. And
actually, you can roughly estimate the timeline from Viago's fiance, right? Because or not fiance, but former lover. And that whole timeline, right? So she's about 96 by the end of the film. So she was probably about like 18 to 22 when she moved over. So it's a period of 70 years that they've been residing in New Zealand together.
Right.
I guess.
Something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's get into some more of this stuff here. Sure. So we've gotten to Jackie. She's brought Nick and this other girl. We never actually find out what happened. Oh, I guess she...
Oh, yes, we do.
Actually, we do, yeah.
She's been spraying blood out of because Nick's trying to escape and he goes into that one room and Viago's like, shit! And he's like...
Again, right?
Hit the main artery and it's spraying out all over the room.
He's a knack for that, eh?
He's just no good at that. But I did want to make one point on Jackie, just to come back to that. So, like, when they go into town and that's such a funny scene or whatever, and I think we'll come back to our favorite scenes later. But just the difference between, like, a vampire familiar and a witch familiar.
Oh, yes.
In folklore. And where, like, we've been watching Sabrina, and they depict familiars with witches and they don't call them wizards, warlocks, I guess.
Yes.
Where they're animals, but they're guardians. And they're looked after mutually. It's like a mutually beneficial relationship, right?
Exactly. It's more respect-based.
Right. And it's paranormal. Like, they have powers, too. Whereas in the vampire world, it's the same term, but it's just like a slave.
Exactly. It's interesting here. Okay, so I was looking at a few different websites that were all about vampire lore and all this stuff. And according to this one here, it says that a familiar is essentially an equivalent of a slave or a servant. It is a dog-to-master relationship. And it is very important that the vampire maintain a sort of a vague nature towards their familiar, never indulging secrets such as the history of vampires or the powers of vampires or anything to do with the society of vampires to a human. If these secrets are indulged, then the human must be killed to correct the balance. Right. And generally the idea is that these sort of servant-master relationships are premised on the basis that the servant will be transformed into a vampire eventually.
Right, and they make a lot of jokes to that in
this
movie.
Really do. It's so funny, though. It says here, this is actually a quote from, it was an excerpt from the Count on the Laws of Vampirism from unboundworlds.com.
Okay.
It says here, since secrecy is our greatest ally, stay vague and indirect, or redirect if pressed for an answer, like a human politician. If familiars begin to ask blunt questions or won't accept your reserve, it may be time to put an end to your arrangement. And so that, to me, kind of speaks to the idea that a lot of these relationships don't actually result in the familiars being transformed. It's most often a case of them being just eliminated.
Yeah, it's a carrot on a stick situation for
exactly.
them. Yeah.
And so we obviously see the undoing of that with Deacon and his familiar in this film.
Later on, yeah.
And he is pissed.
Right.
Because you get this whole antagonistic relationship between him and the newest member of the clan, Nick, who is transformed by Peter.
Right. So let's talk about that then. Because that's funny and interesting. Juicy. So Nick's running through the house trying to escape. Jackie's already left and she's like, he sees her through the window and she's like, sorry, Nick. And he like runs away. Like, such a dick move, obviously. Pretty hilarious.
So good.
And he sees Josephine, who's already been squirting blood all over another room. And he's like not even freaked out. Like, that's the funniest part about it, right? Like,
he's so nonchalant.
Yeah, like he's like kind of like, yeah, he's just like straight face. Runs into a room and then they're like banging on the door and he's just like, fuck off. And they're just like, and then they stop. It's just like, it's like so like New
But
Zealand.
then the creepiest part of the whole movie happens right after that, where Deacon comes out of his backpack.
Yeah.
And how the heck did he get in there? Did he like transform into something and go into the backpack before he entered the room? Or like, how does he end up performing that trick? Hey, we never really know.
Like some weird.
Maybe he transformed into a spider and then got on his backpack and then just like, you know.
Well, because we do know that, there's obviously animal transformation throughout the whole movie. We do actually get in the very beginning, too. I wrote this down and didn't mention it a second ago. In the opening scene before that awesome song, we get almost like a portal too. Like when when Viago wakes up Vladislav, he opens the door and it's like this weird view where instead of looking into a room, he's looking down into like this pit. And Vladislav's like having this weird sex party down there. And then he's like, oh, slams the door. And then a second later he opens it and it's just the regular room. And he's like, oh,
interesting.
Give me
the
20
way that
minutes
you
or whatever.
Phrased that, because the way that I saw that film was that, he was having a huge orgy on the ceiling/wall of his room. So he's in his room,
okay.
And because they're not bound by the laws of gravity.
But it looked like it was like further away, because he was like he had like a whole bunch of I don't know. It looked like it was like
it was a distorted sort of perspective, which was I think meant to just sort of allude to this. I don't even know.
Like, is that
a part?
Is that a part of vampire folklore though? Like that they can, have like a connection to the underworld essentially, like that they have any sort of like they can peek through the veil. You know what I mean? Or like, I guess that would have just been like maybe the hallucination of the people he's having this orgy with or something, and that's just what's seen.
They seem like all
this
is
me
vampires.
Thinking way too deeply into this, obviously.
Yeah,
like,
I really like that though. That's an interesting way of looking at it, because I totally had a different idea of that. And just to sort of add to that whole note of he's having this huge orgy, is the idea of we kind of brushed on it with Deacon, the idea of vampires being sexy, the sort of erotic side of consuming blood and all this kind of stuff. That's definitely a prominent theme in even more just pulp culture stuff that we see today in movies and films and stuff. But
and it's a weird crossover between body horror and
erotic.
Yeah, erotica. And we get that big time in the classic Bram Stoker's Dracula or whatever.
Totally.
There's a lot of nudity and
suggestive kind I'm content. Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. So that's a big part of being a vampire. So that's one bonus of being a vampire, I suppose you could say.
So I'm assuming that there's an exchange of liquids, not just blood.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of stuff going on there.
Right.
Good times.
Yeah. The other awesome joke at the beginning too, a lot of the best jokes I feel are really close to the beginning, even though the whole movie's awesome. Mm-hmm. But when they're sitting down and Viago's lecturing Deacon about not doing the dishes, we get this indication right away that it's their perception of time is obviously so different once they become vampires, right? Mm-hmm. And they're complaining about how Deacon hasn't done the dishes for 5 years, and they're looking at the chore wheel, and it's and Deacon, it still hasn't moved in 5 years, and it's that's a ridiculously long time when you think about it, right? But they're making a joke about that.
Yeah.
And then Jackie gets that same thing later on when he's like, Nick has jumped in front of your place, may I have to punish you a couple of years, perhaps 10 years? 10 years is just a couple of years.
Yeah.
To them.
Yeah, actually that's a good point. I didn't actually even really pick up on that too.
Kind of funny.
Yeah. Okay, even in that first scene, right, we get those tensions of the flatting situation. So we get a lot of these hilarious sort of social aspects that we wouldn't normally associate with a vampire culture.
Yeah.
It's more so just, a Flight of the Conchords type thing.
Yeah.
But then you get this added element of the paranormal. And then again, just even going back to the whole, the tension between Deacon and Nick, that really plays out when Nick starts to think he's this really cool, badass, Twilight guy, and he's going around telling the whole world that he's a vampire.
And literally that he's Twilight, too.
That he's Twilight, essentially, yeah, because that's hip, that's it right now. And then he starts wearing the jacket and everything, and then Deacon basically explodes, and they have this hilarious bat fight.
Ooh, bat fight! Yeah,
it was so good.
So there's another trope, right? The classic changing into a bat is their main other form. But obviously they can change in other things too. Deacon transforms into a dog and has sex as a hobby.
We see Jermaine. Oh, sorry. Well, Jermaine's character, Vladislav, transform into a cat when they're chasing Nick down in the very first opening scene there.
Yeah.
So that's another very interesting idea, is this animism and the idea that they are at will able to convert themselves into other forms. And that brings up an interesting point too, because we have the contrast between the vampires and werewolves, and the idea that there is this hierarchy of societies, and the werewolves are seen to be quite low. They can't control their abilities, right? So I feel that's a part of it, versus the way the vampires are able, they can manipulate things, they're always in control seemingly. And one question I had that was kind of interesting, that I wanted to bring up to you, was why do you think werewolves are excluded from the secret society of like and they're excluded from the ball. What's that called again?
The Unholy Masquerade.
Right, the Unholy Masquerade. They're not invited, even though zombies are there.
Well, I've got an answer for that.
What?
And it's, I don't know, maybe this is just too obvious, but I feel like it's because they transform. Right? Like, they're unpredictable. Everybody else at that Holy Masquerade just is what they are. A zombie's a zombie, a witch is a witch. And they even make the comment that, like, there's banshees, we all get together and we all hang out or whatever, like, at that. So, whatever a banshee is, right? Like, kind of in between a witch and a weird, crazy spirit thing. We gotta go back and listen to that Graveyard Tales episode.
Oh, yeah.
But, everyone there doesn't put anyone else at risk. You know what I mean? Where, like, when they're in the woods later on, they're like, get out of here right now, that guy in the bow tie, he's gonna go first. Like, as in, the vampires, too, are at risk. Yeah. Not just the humans.
Exactly.
So, obviously they're a threat because they're just wild, savage animals.
Well, they're volatile.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting parallel then, right? The civilized secret society and then the uncivilized sort of underground.
Yeah. We're auctioning a live meat pack this year. They've just got a guy in a cage. Like, it's an awesome prize. Like, you can buy a book for 20 or tickets for... It's so awesome. It's like just this chubby guy with glasses just like...
What am I doing here? So that brings up another fun point about this movie is the presence of Stu at this unholy masquerade and the trouble he stirs up between Vladislav and the Beast.
So just to bring it up to the unholy masquerade, so we've got Jackie brings over people to be consumed. One is, but Nick gets bitten by Peter, turned into a vampire because he's forced to drink the blood. That's the other main part about becoming a vampire that we're given, right? Like, you have to drink... He has to drink Peter's blood in order to become a vampire, and he's like, I just thought it was some German thing these guys do. So he becomes a vampire, but then he has to tell his friend Stu that he's a vampire. And then that's how Stu comes into the picture, and of course everyone decides that they love Stu, even though he's got big rosy cheeks and they want to eat him.
They really want to eat him, but he's really helpful. He brings them into the 21st century, introduces them to the World Wide Web, gets Vladislav poking women online.
Facebook
and he gives them so much, right? Like, he just adds so much value to the group. And it's interesting because Stu, he plays himself. I thought that was hilarious.
First and last name. Like, so awesome.
That's so good. But, okay, so Stu is an interesting character because he breaks that law, right? Like, Nick essentially breaks the law by telling Stu that he is a vampire. All of them are simultaneously breaking the law, right? Because Stu is obviously not meant to know. But I just love how he's, again, just so nonchalant. Just whatever, computers, IT, whatever.
Like, he doesn't even notice at first, right? Like, before Nick even tells him, they're out on the town and Stu's with them and they have that confrontation with the werewolves and Stu's just, like, standing there eating a burrito, like, with the most confused look in his face, just like, it's just like... He's
like, I'm just here.
Yeah.
So he comes to the ball and then we get this whole thing because Vladislav, he... is in dire straits. He's super depressed because he wasn't named the honorable member of the ball or whatever. What was that
The
thing?
guest of honor.
The guest of honor, right. Yeah. And that goes to the Beast instead, which is actually his ex-girlfriend, Pauline.
They build up to that, right? Like, you don't find out until the ball.
All you see is just that hilarious... What was that one image? It's like a... It's like... It's some sort of animal with, like, a dick hanging off.
Yeah, it's like some sort of beat monster with, like, hair and fur. Yeah, just a penis
hanging off the chest.
And then chicken legs and, like, I don't even know, like, some other crazy beak or something.
And they just refer constantly to all these, like, epic fights and battles between Vladislav.
But it's just, like... But it's so funny, right? Because they're just, like, the way they say it, it's like as if it's just a group of friends, like in high school, right? Like, Viago's rolling his eyes like, oh, I fought the beast in a swamp. Oh, I fought the beast in the toilets of a nightclub. Like, difficult battle.
Difficult. Oh, man. So we get that epic battle, and then he ends up slaying, or no, Stu ends up slaying the guy, her date or whatever. He was like a crazy, I don't even know what he was, a goblin or a warlock or something.
He was a vampire.
Oh, was he a vampire?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is Pauline, the Beast's date. Yeah. Just gets where did he even get that thing, Stu? Like, it's just like this giant pole spear. It was like a flag pole, but with a pointed end, and he just gourds this guy.
That was brilliant. One of my favorite parts of that scene, though, is when Vladislav tries to make his big dramatic entrance, and he's like referring, he's like, "You remember me?"
Yeah.
And she like gets like the name wrong like 4 times before she guesses it's him, and he has to take off his little like mask in order for her.
It's dramatic.
Clearly, he's been forgotten over the years.
Yeah.
Oh, that was so good.
Right.
Okay, so then we get up to the part where Stu ends up being transformed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So again, we're exploring this dichotomy between werewolves and vampires.
Right.
And the tensions, and how the tensions are ultimately resolved by the end of the mockumentary. Mm-hmm. I thought that was quite interesting.
That was kind of a funny twist, yeah.
It
Unexpected.
was. Mm-hmm.
So they leave the Unholy Masquerade after Stu stabs this guy, because they're kind of like, yeah, we should probably go. And, of course, Deacon is always searching out the werewolves. He always wants to pick fight. Right?
Yeah, he's the lippy one.
He was like chirping them when they first crossed earlier in the movie or whatever, and of course they make a Flight of the Conchords reference in that scene, right? Because of course Murray is the leader of the werewolves.
Rhys Darby,
and he makes that comment, right? Of course, because the camera crew is following all the vampires, and he's just like, "Oh, what's with the cameras? He's shooting a music video. It's a music video, is it?" Like it's just like it's always a music video. It's just like. Yeah, it's a music video.
Yeah,
no,
so
like,
good. Want to see some awesome rotundas?
Yeah. Just so classic, right? But then, yeah, Deacon smells them again after the Unholy Masquerade, seeks them out. And then again, they're like trying to plan out their night, right? Chain themselves up to trees. And it's just like, where are your sweatpants, guys? Like, you've lost all those trousers, guys. Like, trying to plan ahead so that when you expand, priceless,
That's
right?
the best part, because they take a lot of what was so great and what people liked about the werewolves in Twilight, and just made it, like, just turned it into like a comedic,
a total joke.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
Right.
I thought that was quite interesting. But then again, okay, so one of my favorite scenes at the very end of that is when Nick's torn apart. Or sorry, not Nick. Stu is torn apart, and then Nick is torn up over the fact that Stu's been torn apart. And Deacon, of all the guys, he's the one that goes to him to kind of help him feel better. His way of just comforting him is so funny.
So morbid, right?
It's so morbid.
It's like it's what you would expect from a vampire.
It is.
That's like all they know is like just morbid stuff, right?
Yeah.
Especially Deacon, actually. So like, I don't even know, what was your favorite out of that line? He's sitting there, he's just like, which was the worst one? Like the mask made out of crackers, and you get your face pecked away by ducks. Geese. Like,
doesn't he say something about how like you'd fall asleep and then a pile of leaves will like block your throat, or
fall
like
asleep in an autumn pile of leaves and have one of them block your windpipe? It's just like,
or even the worst, how he describes how your human friends get older and older, and then as they age, they get stupid and they forget things.
They can't piss.
Exactly. And then they do die.
You wish they were dead, and then they do die. And the look on Nick's face is just priceless. It's just so funny. He's just like, this is not, I hope I made you feel better. Yeah, no, that's an awesome scene. Like, Deacon is like kind of the most morbid out of all of them almost, right? Like he's describing Vladislav earlier in the film. He's like, Vladislav used to be super powerful, right? Like before the Beast. And he's like, he used to have like great orgies, like killing men, women, children. It was totally great. Like he's just like super stoked on it. Thought it was awesome. He was also a part of the Nazis.
Oh,
like we get that joke, right? He's just like, which is actually kind of funny because we just watched a documentary on, I mean, there's a million documentaries on all the occult stuff Nazis are interested in. They would have actually legit been interested in this if they had any inclination vampires were a real thing. And he makes the joke like, they were trying to make a vampire
Nazi
military force.
Warrior.
Yeah. And if you were a Nazi vampire, no way.
No way. After the war?
Yeah.
No way. So he basically pieces it out to New Zealand, I guess, to escape the heat.
That's right.
I thought that was really fun. So, okay, what else do we have here? We haven't actually discussed the scene where Peter dies.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
The idea that because of Nick being so open about his status and he ultimately violates the laws of the vampire world, he brings about the death of Peter, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is really sad. I didn't like that scene.
No, it was sad. And it's the guy, of course, he bumps into in town. The exact guy. It wasn't just someone who, like, heard him yelling. It was, like, some guy's just like, I'm a vampire. And the guy's like, I'm a vampire hunter. And he's like, no, you're not. Like, I'll Skype you. And he's just, like, walking away. Like, just, like,
super cash.
Yeah.
And then he, like, says it, like, as they, like, turn his head around because it's been twisted to the back. He's like, oh yeah, I gave that guy my email.
Yeah, oh shit, I know that guy. Like, well, I did, I just gave him my email.
And so they go about reconstructing what essentially happened and the idea that this vampire hunter broke through the window and then tried to, get Peter, and then Peter crushes him with his, the door of his chamber.
Yeah.
And then essentially is, compromised by the sunlight.
Yeah.
And then you get this super dramatic scene, right, where it's like this big rush to the basement where Peter is, and then you get Vladislav running for the fire extinguisher, and then he literally throws like a cup of water down the stairs, and then he says, "I'm too late."
I was too late. Yeah.
It's like, oh man, I don't even know.
And then it's like, obviously they do feel something, right? Like, you know, he's like, turn that off, like our friends just died in a tragic sunlight accident, right? And it's like, it's supposed to be, it's funny.
Yeah.
But it's like, Viago makes the comment later on then, it's like, well, I don't know, like, you know, I still feel things. It's like they say vampires are dead, like, definitely dead. But, and then they do the little send-off for Stu, too, right? Like, when he's torn apart, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Like, they do have emotions.
They really do,
right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Like, beyond just, like, anger and lust and, like, things like that, but also, like, love and sadness and things. Like, that's how it's portrayed in this comedy.
Exactly.
That's kind of an interesting thing.
Mourning, for sure.
Interesting juxtaposition to most of the stories of vampires that we know of, obviously.
Yeah, actually, that was very interesting. Okay, what else did I really want to touch on?
You wrote down the crucifix part too, like when Peter's laying on, or when the vampire hunter's laying on the ground, and they like are walking over. Deacon's giving the little reenactment of what happened, and then he's like, and then he came over here, like all of a sudden they see the crucifix, and he like can't handle it, and then as soon as it's covered up, it's just like, and then he just keeps going like nothing happened. It's really funny. It's very well acted.
It is.
Like, it's
tight.
They're on point. Like, yeah, it's really tight. The comedy is really, really tight.
The script was brilliant. It was very well put together. And I thought that was so funny how they, like, make the point. They're, like, looking at his, like, steaks. They're like, these are whittled from table legs. You think he did these by hand? Sanded this? Like, that's impressive.
Yeah, they're admiring it. Oh, man.
That was a good one.
What, you know, okay, let me ask you a question then.
Okay.
Like, because we're kind of getting towards the end here. Did you already give your favorite scene? I don't think you did. What if you had to pick your favorite scene? What made you laugh the most, or was most entertaining for you in this film? What would you have to choose?
So many, but like I said, Deacon is becoming my favorite more and more so. Like in the beginning, it was more so Viago and Vladislav, but now I'm more so on to Deacon. And I think one of my favorite scenes involving him particularly is when he is giving his traditional erotic dance to the other flatmates.
Yeah.
And he's just like, it's like this scene, I don't even know, it's like probably like a minute and a half long. It feels long, right? It's just this very ornate, interesting, like, Eastern
It's probably
music.
like 20 seconds.
It's probably 20 seconds. But he like goes... He's this whole routine.
It's Asian. It's like some like Malaysian dance or something like that. It
sounds very Eastern.
It reminds me of the Baraka. Remember that documentary thing and they had some dance going on? It reminds me of that.
Exactly. And it's so funny because then you see he actually gets a little bit like self-conscious when Nick shows up. And then he even like Nick tries to make the comment. He's like, oh, it looked really good. Like, but he like stops it right away as soon as Nick, because he's all like mad that Nick's part of the crew and stuff. That was one of my favorite. It's really hard to choose though.
Well, and because he's flying around and he's like, everyone can see you flying. He's like, you have a whole documentary crew following you around, which is like a very good point. Like actually trying to keep it low key.
Yeah.
My favorite part of the movie it's hard to choose. There's so many funny parts, but my favorite part is right after the death of Peter. And the police show up at the door.
Oh yeah,
it's so good. So like the two cops show up and they're hilarious. Like there's the short woman cop. She's so funny.
She's brilliant.
And she's just kind of like leading them through the house or whatever. And Viago, of course, does he's not a very good hypnotist, but he hypnotizes them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or he blocks out them seeing anything out of the ordinary. And they're walking around the house and they're in the kitchen and like Nick is like up on the ceiling like this, like all crazy, and like Deacon's floating in the middle of the kitchen and they're just in there like no, there's no smoke detectors in here. Like,
See that?
yeah.
They like shine light right at him.
Yeah. No smoke detectors, mate. And then they go downstairs. That's the best part. They go downstairs and it's just like the dead vampire hunter. He's like, what's going on with this guy? It's just like, that's our friend. He's drunk. He's passed out. It's just like, yeah, well, whatever. Maybe get him a blanket or something. This guy's gonna feel terrible in the morning.
And then the guy cop, he like makes come. He's like, why don't you just put that thing? He like looks at the door.
He's just like,
concrete
might want to
door.
get that slab of concrete off of him. That might be a start. That's my favorite part of the movie because it just shows the mind manipulation, but just in the funniest way. So awesome.
Yeah, the cops were definitely really good. And then again, you get them later on after Stu's attack, and you see them rounding up this poor dog and trying to blame
It's just like
him.
a collie, just like a regular like I don't even know.
Just like a Sheltie mix or something.
Yeah.
Like
This poor thing, and it just looks up. It's like, whoa. Like,
and it's got like white on like where its mouth is, no evidence of blood whatsoever.
No.
They're like, we're gonna have to put this one down.
Yeah.
Oh, the poor guy.
The last point I did want to make before I forget, because I said I would, just to come back to the idea of Peter being 8,000 years old. I find to be really fascinating, and like the only mention of like ancient vampires throughout the entire movie. Because we get, obviously, the play on Vladislav the Impaler with Vladislav the Poker. And that was one of the origin stories of vampires and, like, you know, Romania and all that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But that's a really cool idea. That's kind of interesting to think about, right? Like, 8,000 years old, he's a vampire. That means he was around, like, pre-Egyptian. This is, like, ancient Berbers, like, traveling through, you know, the ancient peoples of Africa and stuff like that were dealing with vampires. And that's just such a cool thought.
That is really
like,
cool.
You know, like pre-language, pre-anything, not pre-language, but like pre-writing, right? So like they wouldn't be able to document these things other than to draw a vampire on a cave wall or something.
Yeah.
Which is just so cool.
And then on the reverse end of that, like all the things that Peter would have seen, you know, and like all the history and all the stories that he could tell. And he is the only character where we like don't get anything out of. Like he doesn't speak, he doesn't do anything. Like he doesn't not do anything. He is responsible for 2 of the major transformations, like Nick and then obviously Deacon, like hundreds of years before.
Yeah.
Where he's selling his wares. And I saw a castle. I thought it looks creepy.
Very old and creepy.
Very old.
But then that's interesting too, right? Because Peter's in that castle. So it's like throughout the millennium, you know, that's an interesting thought, right? This idea that like vampires will weasel their way into like positions of power and like survive through the ages and end up, you know, he's 8,000 years old, he ends up living in a medieval castle because he's taken over whatever.
And then from there he ends up living in a flat in New Zealand.
That's right, yeah.
That would be interesting even to do like a sequel. It's like the adventures of Peter and how Peter ended up at this flat in New Zealand, because like that is a big mystery. You don't get a lot from him, but I don't know how they would tell that story effectively.
I don't think we're ever going to see a sequel to this, although we have heard rumors that they might try to turn it into a TV series, like a mini series or something. I don't know how true that is. I hope they do.
That would be fun.
Highly recommended. If I'm just to finish on a note, like we had to slip a comedy in here because with all the horror, but
yeah, we wanted to keep it lighter this week. Before we wrap it up, though, I had one more question I wanted to ask you.
Sure, okay.
I wanted to just briefly touch on the mockumentary element and the idea, like, did you find this effective for this kind of narrative? Or would you have preferred the more traditional, like, you know, like, omnipotent, like, just whatever?
No, I think this was, like, the most effective and the only way they could have done it, because they rely so much on the subtle glances from the characters, right? Breaking the third wall if it wasn't a documentary. You know what I mean? Like they're looking at the camera, like they're looking right at you. As
it's
if
the
to
Jim
be like,
Halpert, right?
Exactly.
The breaking
exactly. It's the Jim Halpert from totally. And I just think like that's the funniest part. It's the facial expressions. The lines are funny, but it's like the faces to go with them are what really accentuate the jokes.
Exactly. And the fact that they're presenting their lives to this film crew. So in a sense, it does become presentational to a certain degree.
Right.
But it's just hilarious things that they end up revealing.
Of course, right? Well, because they're trying to be cool.
Yeah.
Right, and we get there in the beginning, like, we're ready to hit the town and party. Vampire style. And they all like, talk over top of, and then they're sitting at the back of the bus.
That's so good.
Priceless.
Why would you fly?
Yeah. Oh, it's too conspicuous.
Too conspicuous. It's nighttime.
Yeah. No. Well, yeah, that's my answer for that. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't think there would have been any other way. And it does add, again, to the originality of the film itself. Yeah.
And they get more interaction with the fake crew than other mockumentaries too, which makes it funny, like in a way, right? Like when they're at the masquerade where it's like, you brought your whole documentary crew here, man. He's like, you will not eat any camera guys, maybe one camera guy. Like, you know what I mean? That's not quite the same as like Fubar, where like the only interaction there in that movie is like when the director falls in the river or whatever. And spoiler alert for Fubar, came out a long time ago, but not a paranormal movie. We won't be doing it on our show.
Aww.
Highly recommended though. It's Canadian.
It's great.
Super funny.
It is really funny. If you're a fan of Trailer Park Boys, check that out.
Definitely. So I guess that kind of wraps it up.
I think so.
Thanks a lot for listening to this installment of Film Friday. Super fun.
As you could probably tell, we do highly recommend this film.
We do.
So
You'll
go
get a
check it
good
out.
laugh, 100%. We hope you've all watched it already, obviously, listening to this full episode. But do we know what we're doing next week? We're announcing on Sunday.
Ooh.
We can always just announce it on Sunday.
Well, actually, we do have... I actually wanted to announce our entire December lineup.
Okay.
Before we...
Sweet. That's
wrap it up today, just because I thought it'd be fun, right? So everyone can know what to look forward to.
Yeah, have a little list of like cool movies to check out at your leisure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this week we're doing What We Do in the Shadows. The following week we are actually doing The Wailing. Ooh. That was recommended by Adam Castaneda, so thank you for that.
Awesome.
And then after that, we are going to have Troll Hunter. That was put forth by Charlene Ramler, so thank you, Charlene.
Thank you, Charlene.
And then following that, we are going to be doing Dark City, submitted by Bradley Morris. So
Sweet.
that's... and then we do have one more, I guess, too, 10 Cloverfield Lane. So all of those are coming up this month.
Cool. Okay. Well, those are some movies for you guys to check out and be ready to go for some sweet Film Friday discussions. And we've been honestly overwhelmed with the feedback. People seem to really be enjoying these Film Fridays as an addition to the episodes. And we hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And until Sunday.
Yep.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.